When they finally arrived in the city, George offered to buy Mick a meal and find him a place to stay for the night. Mick graciously accepted, and they spent the evening talking and sharing stories. George learned that Mick had been struggling to adjust to civilian life since leaving the army. He had trouble finding work and had been living on the streets for the past few months. Moved by Mick's story, George decided to help him get back on his feet. He connected Mick with a local veterans organization that offered support and resources for former soldiers. With their help, Mick was able to find a job and a place to live. George was glad to have been able to make a difference in Mick's life, and he was grateful for the chance to have met such a remarkable person. As George drove away, he couldn't help but reflect on the encounter. Meeting Mick had reminded him of the sacrifices that so many people make in service to their country. It had also reminded him of the power of kindness and compassion. George knew that he would never forget Mick or the lessons he had learned from him. Mick's life took a drastic turn after the news of Lucy's divorce. He was devastated, and the pain of losing his wife and the betrayal by his friend weighed heavily on him. Mick struggled to find meaning in his life, trying different jobs and traveling the world, but nothing could fill the void left by Lucy's departure. Eventually, Mick retreated into the solitude of a small wooden cabin where he lived a reclusive life. His only companions were the animals of the forest, which he cared for as a gamekeeper. Despite his isolation, Mick found solace in nature, and the work helped him cope with his deep sense of loss and loneliness. Years passed, and Mick's appearance changed, reflecting the hardships he had endured. His long gray hair and scraggly beard were a testament to his solitude and inner turmoil. He had become a shadow of his former self, a man haunted by the memories of his past life. Despite his hardships, Mick found a semblance of peace in the quiet life he had carved out for himself. He tended to his crops, watched over the forest, and found comfort in the simple rhythms of nature. The world may have turned its back on him, but Mick had found a way to survive, to find meaning in his solitary existence. Mick's heart went out to the orphaned Lynx Cubs. Despite his usual aversion to human contact, he knew he couldn't abandon them. He took them back to his cabin, where he set up a warm and safe space for them. Feeding them was a challenge at first, but Mick managed to find suitable food for the cubs. He spent hours caring for them, ensuring they were comfortable and well-fed. As time passed, the cubs grew stronger and more playful, bringing a new sense of purpose to Mick's life. The bond between Mick and the Lynx Cubs grew stronger every day. They became his companions, providing him with a sense of connection he hadn't felt since Lucy left. Mick found joy in watching the cubs grow and thrive under his care. Despite his newfound happiness, Mick knew that the cubs belonged in the wild. He began preparing them for release, teaching them essential skills they would need to survive on their own. It was a bittersweet moment when he finally set them free, but Mick knew it was the right thing to do. With the cubs gone, Mick's cabin felt empty once again, but this time, he didn't retreat into solitude. Instead, he found comfort in the memories of his time with the cubs and the knowledge that he had made a difference in their lives. Mick continued his work as a gamekeeper, but now he did it with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that he had the capacity to care for others, both human and animal, and that his life had meaning beyond his own struggles. Mick was stunned by the bravery and ferocity of the lynxes. They had saved his life, risking their own in the process. From that day on, Mick felt a deep sense of gratitude towards the animals that had become his companions. As they continued their walks in the forest, Mick noticed a change in himself. He no longer felt as lonely or isolated as he once did. The presence of the lynxes gave him a sense of purpose and companionship that he had been missing for so long. Word of Mick's encounter with the wolves spread through the local community, and soon he became known as the Lynx Man. People would come from far and wide to hear his story and catch a glimpse of the animals that had saved his life. Mick's life had been transformed by the lynxes. He was no longer the reclusive man he once was, but a respected member of the community. He continued to care for the lynxes, and they continued to bring him joy and companionship. In the end, it was the bond between a man and his unlikely companions that had brought them all together. Mick had found solace and purpose in caring for the lynxes, and they had found a friend in him. Together, they had overcome adversity and forged a bond that would last a lifetime. Mick was devastated by the loss of his beloved lynxes. Their sacrifice had saved his life, but it had left him heartbroken. As he buried them, he knew that he would never forget the bravery they had shown. Their deaths had a profound impact on Mick. He realized that he had been wasting his life by isolating himself from others. He had been pushing people away, but now he wanted to make amends. With a newfound sense of purpose, Mick decided to return to his home village. Hitchhiking all the way, Mick reflected on his journey and the lessons he had learned. He knew that he couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. He was determined to reconnect with the people he had lost touch with and to live his life to the fullest. As Mick shared his story with George, the man who had given him a ride, he felt a sense of closure. He was grateful for George's kindness and for being a part of his journey. Mick knew that he still had a long way to go, but he was ready to take the first step towards rebuilding his life.